The sound of moving boxes being taped shut downstairs was the first thing that woke me on a cold Tuesday morning. I stood at the top of the staircase in my dressing gown, looking down into the hallway of the house I had owned for 42 years. My 35-year-old son, Julian, and his wife, Victoria, were already directing two movers in Navy uniforms. They were stacking my antique grandfather clock, my wife's handcrafted side tables, and cardboard crates marked basement storage right near the front entryway. "Take the cedar chest next," Victoria said, checking items off an iPad with a diamond-tipped stylus. "We need this foyer completely cleared before the painters arrive on Thursday. The master suite upstairs needs to be staged by the weekend." Julian looked up from his coffee, finally noticing me standing on the landing. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look embarrassed. He simply gave a casual nod, as if I were a guest who had overstayed his welcome at a bed and breakfast. "Morning, Dad," Julian said, his voice entirely unbothered. "We told you last week we were starting the transition today. Victoria found a lovely one-bedroom unit at Shady Pines Senior Community. They have a shuttle service and community bingo on Tuesdays. It's much safer for you." They thought 74 years of age meant I was ready to be packed away into a corner. They thought because I let them stay in my guest wing rent-free after Julian's tech startup crashed last winter, I had quietly surrendered ownership of my home. Victoria had already shown her friends photos of her new renovation project, telling everyone at her country club that my 5-acre estate was their personal inheritance. I didn't argue. I didn't shout, throw a tantrum, or demand that the movers leave my hallway. Instead, I walked calmly down the stairs, poured myself a cup of black coffee from my kitchen, and took a seat in my leather armchair in the study. In my desk drawer sat the original title deed, along with a formal notice to vacate, drafted 3 days ago by the county sheriff's legal liaison. Julian and Victoria believed my silence over the past 6 months was permission. They were about to learn that quiet generosity has a very sharp boundary, and their transition was about to head in a completely different direction. To understand how my son arrived at the point of ordering movers into my living room, you have to know the history of this family. I spent 40 years working as an industrial mechanical engineer at the local manufacturing plant. I earned every dollar through long swing shifts, machine grease, and careful budgeting. When my late wife, Martha, and I bought this property in 1984, the house was a modest ranch surrounded by 5 acres of untamed woods. Martha and I worked with our own hands every weekend to expand the footprint. We added the wraparound porch where we watched the sunset every summer evening. We planted 30 apple trees in the orchard that now produce bushels of fruit every autumn. We poured our life's blood into turning this house into a sanctuary for our family. When Julian was growing up, Martha and I made sure he had every advantage we lacked. We paid for his private boarding school, funded 4 years at an elite business college, and provided a $50,000 security cushion when he launched his software consultancy. When Martha passed away 5 years ago, my world grew quiet. The house felt large and empty, but every room was filled with her warmth and memory. Then, 8 months ago, Julian called me in tears. His company had lost its primary client, his business line of credit had been frozen, and he and Victoria were facing foreclosure on their downtown penthouse. "Dad, we just need a place to stay for 3 or 4 months while I restructure the business," Julian pleaded over the phone, "just until we get back on our feet." I welcomed them with open arms. I gave them the entire east wing of the house, refused to take a single dollar for rent or groceries, and even covered the increase in utility bills. I believed I was helping my son rebuild his life, but entitlement has a way of creeping in when respect walks out the door. Within 2 months, Victoria began making passive-aggressive comments about the house. "This wood paneling is so depressingly dated," she would say during dinner, rolling her eyes at my oak walls. "And having an old man walking up and down the stairs at 6 in the morning is really disrupting Julian's creative work rhythm." Julian didn't defend me. Instead, he started agreeing with her. He began treating me like an inconvenient tenant in my own home. They stopped asking before having their loud corporate friends over on weekends. They parked their leased German cars in the middle of my driveway, blocking my old truck in the garage. The turning point happened 3 weeks ago. I was working in my garden shed when I overheard Julian and Victoria sitting on the back patio with a local high-end interior designer. "Once we move Arthur into the assisted living suite downtown, we can knock down this load-bearing wall to create an open-concept chef's kitchen," Victoria was saying, pointing a laser measure at my living room windows. "The property value will double, and we can leverage the equity to refinance Julian's company." "Is the paperwork in order?" the designer asked. Julian laughed quietly. "Dad's old and tired. He doesn't have the energy to fight us on this. We've already put down a non-refundable deposit at Shady Pines. He'll sign the power of attorney once he sees how nice the senior facility is." They didn't just want to modernize a house, they wanted to strip an old man of his home, his dignity, and 40 years of memories to bail out their own irresponsible lifestyle. I didn't confront them that afternoon. I went back to pruning my apple trees. But the moment they left for a dinner party that evening, I drove straight to my longtime attorney, Franklin Hayes. Franklin has handled my legal and financial affairs since 1990. When I laid out what Julian and Victoria were planning, Franklin took off his glasses and looked at me with grave concern. "Arthur, under state law, because they have resided there for over 6 months with your permission, they might attempt to claim tenancy rights or contest your competency if they file first," Franklin explained. "Do you want to handle this softly, or do you want to handle this by the book?" "Franklin," I replied calmly. I gave my son 40 years of support, and he repaid me by measuring my living room for his wife's vanity project, draft an immediate revocation of license, a formal 30-day notice to vacate, and update my family trust. For the next 2 hours, Franklin drafted an ironclad strategy. First, Julian was permanently removed as the executor and successor trustee of my estate. The entire 5-acre property and my liquid investment accounts were placed into a private conservation trust. Upon my passing, the land is designated to become a community botanical park, named after Martha, managed by the County Forestry Department. Second, Franklin prepared an expedited court-certified eviction package, complete with formal sheriff's service, stating that Julian and Victoria were occupying the property on a revocable month-to-month license that had been officially terminated. Third, I instructed Franklin to add a specific clause regarding my personal assets. Julian's inheritance was set to exactly $50, with a formal note attached stating that his past business bailouts represented his full share of the family wealth. Franklin looked at the final documents, signed his witness line, and looked up. "Arthur, once the sheriff serves this, there is no turning back. Are you sure?" I took my pen, signed every page with a firm, steady hand, and handed the folder back. "Respect is not something you negotiate with thieves, Franklin," I said, "even if one of them shares your last name." Fast forward to that cold Tuesday morning when the movers were taping boxes in my hallway. Victoria walked into my study, holding a clipboard and a glossy brochure for Shady Pines Senior Community. "Arthur, we need you to sign the intake assessment for the facility," Victoria said, placing the brochure and a pen on my desk. "The transport van will be here at 2 o'clock to help you move your personal clothes. Julian and I have a conference call with our investors at noon, so let's get this finalized quickly." Julian walked in behind her, looking down at his phone. "It's for the best, Dad. You won't have to worry about mowing the lawn or maintaining the roof anymore." I looked at the brochure, then looked up at my son and his wife. "Julian," I said softly, my voice completely level, "did you honestly believe that an engineer who spent 40 years designing industrial plants wouldn't notice when people are trying to demolish his foundation?" Victoria sighed loudly with irritation. "Arthur, please don't be dramatic. We're doing this for your safety. You're doing this because your startup is $60,000 in debt and you wanted to leverage my equity to save your pride," I said, opening my desk drawer. Julian's face turned pale. "Dad, how did you—" I pulled out the blue folder Franklin had prepared and laid it flat on the mahogany desk. Beside it, the doorbell rang with 2 heavy, authoritative knocks. I stood up, walked past them to the front door, and opened it. Standing on the porch was Deputy Miller from the County Sheriff's Department, holding a sealed envelope. "Morning, Mr. Vance," Deputy Miller said respectfully, tipping his hat. "I have the certified notices as requested." "Thank you, Deputy," I said, taking the envelope and walking back into the study. I handed the envelope directly to Julian. "What is this?" Julian asked, his hands trembling as he tore open the seal. "That is a formal notice to vacate the premises within 72 hours, I said calmly. "The movers you hired to pack my wife's furniture will now be packing your clothes and your leased office equipment instead." Victoria grabbed the papers from Julian's hands, her eyes scanning the legal language. When she saw the sheriff's seal, the revocation of their residence license, and the trust amendment locking the property into a municipal park, her jaw dropped in utter disbelief. "You can't do this!" Victoria shrieked, her voice shaking with rage. "Julian is your son. This house belongs to the family. We spent thousands planning the remodel." "This house belongs to Martha and me," I answered, stepping toward them. "You walked into my home as guests when you were bankrupt. I fed you, housed you, and asked for nothing. In return, you tried to throw me out of the house I built so you could host dinner parties for your friends." Julian stepped forward, tears welling in his eyes. "Dad, please look at me. We were just trying to modernize things. We have nowhere else to go. The business account is completely frozen. If you kick us out, we have to file for personal bankruptcy." "Then you will file for bankruptcy, Julian," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "A man who cannot honor his father's roof has no business pretending to be an executive. You wanted to manage property? Go earn your own." "You're an old monster," Victoria shouted, slamming her iPad onto the desk. "You'd leave your own son on the street?" "Deputy Miller is waiting outside by his vehicle," I replied evenly. "If your personal belongings are not out of this house by 5 o'clock on Thursday, the locks will be changed, and anything left behind will be donated to the Veterans Shelter." Julian stood frozen, staring at the floor as the weight of his actions crashed down upon him. He realized there was no argument, no manipulation, and no excuse that could crack 40 years of quiet, disciplined resolve. Without another word, Julian turned around, grabbed Victoria by the arm, and walked out to tell the movers to unpack my grandfather clock and start loading their own boxes instead. By Thursday afternoon, the driveway was completely clear. Julian and Victoria were forced to surrender the lease on their luxury vehicles and move into a small third-floor walk-up apartment on the far industrial side of town. Julian took a junior programming job at a logistics firm to pay off their business creditors, while Victoria had to return to full-time retail management. Julian called me 4 months later from a payphone near his office. He wasn't demanding money, and he wasn't making excuses. For the first time in 10 years, he spoke with humility. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking over the line, "I'm sorry. I let greed and panic turn me into someone you and Mom never raised me to be." "I hear you, Julian," I replied quietly from my porch. "I forgive you as your father. But respect is something you prove with years of quiet action, not 20 seconds of regret. Build your own life with integrity, and we'll see where we stand." I hung up the phone and looked out over the 5 acres of green lawn and the tall birch trees Martha and I planted 40 years ago. Never let anyone mistake your quiet patience for weakness. Never allow anyone to treat your lifelong sacrifices like an entitlement, no matter who they are. And always remember, a home built on hard work and integrity will always stand firm against those who try to claim what they never earned. If this story reminded you of the strength in setting firm boundaries and protecting your dignity, please consider subscribing to the Quiet Files. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay one step ahead of those who underestimate quiet strength. Until next time, keep your head high and protect the peace you worked a lifetime to build.